Magavana Melanin and Vindu to my fellow subscribers who have been following me for a while. I thought that I would talk about the Eightfold Path of Buddhism because Buddhism was my very first spiritual path to awakening. I got into Buddhism, and that is kind of what set me on the journey in my early 20s. So I wanted to talk about the Eightfold Path because I tend to see that the elves actually had the ability to carry themselves in that kind of way, that they were able to attend to the Eightfold Path of Buddhism in their daily lives, at least by the third age. So I found examples of how Tolkien wrote about the characters and expressed them through the Eightfold Path. So what is the Eightfold Path? Well, there are 8 types of ways of being that Buddha talked about when he was teaching about how to alleviate your own suffering and to have a life of peace and bliss. And it's really quite simple, but it may seem complicated to people, but it really has to do with just being very aware of yourself and how you relate to others, how you speak to others, and how you think and how you also treat others. So I'll talk about the Eightfold Path. There are 8 different ways of being. They can kind of be divided into 3 sections. So for the first one is wisdom, which is right understanding, right aspiration or right thought. Morality, which is right speech, right action, and the right livelihood that someone chooses to live their life as. And then we have a third category, which is concentration. And so it's right mindfulness, right effort, and right concentration. These 8 will allow you to always be in a state of awareness and present with your present moment in time of how you make your decisions and how you go about your life in a wise way. So let's begin. I have my wonderful Lord of the Rings book, which has all 3 books in it. But I did kind of just focus on the first book because what I noticed about Tolkien, he was very in touch with the Eightfold Path. He himself kind of described his good characters in that type of way, that they were the type of characters to always move on that Eightfold Path and do the right things, say the right things, make the right efforts with the right intentions. So this was seen throughout all of his stories with his good characters that were working on the side of the light and fighting against the darkness of Sauron. But I did find exact instances and quotes that can give you a little bit of an idea of how you can apply each of these different types of truths and ways of being. So for the first one, the right view and the right understanding. I think that the example of right view is very apparent in the Council of Elrond chapter within the Fellowship of the Ring. It just seems that Elrond is able to take a step back and to understand things from many different points of view. Having the right view and the right understanding is explained by the Buddha to be able to understand what is going on around you and see things as they really are, not as you wish to see them, but as they really are, because there lies the solutions to the problems that are in your present moment. So you must be able to see things as they really are. And so Elrond has this ability within the council to kind of be that voice of that wisdom and that logic, along with Gandalf, of course, because he is a member of the White Council as well. But we do see this in Elrond a lot. And so here is an example. Fruitless, did I call the victory the last alliance? Not wholly so, yet it did not achieve its end. Sauron was diminished, but not destroyed. His ring was lost, but not unmade. The dark tower was broken, but its foundations were not removed, for they were made with the power of the ring, and while it remains, they will endure. Many elves and many mighty men and many of their friends had perished in the war. Anarion was slain, and Isildur was slain, and Gilgalad and Elendil were no more. Never again shall there be any such league of elves and men, for men multiply, and the firstborn decrease, and the two kindreds are estranged, and ever since that day the race of Numenor had decayed, and the span of their years had lessened. So you can see that Elrond has this ability of looking at things from the right point of view, where he notices, yes, there are some pros to the situation of all the different wars that the elves had. And yes, there was a type of victory achieved, but the ring was not destroyed completely. So it is the ability to see both pros and cons in the present moment in time, which is very much kind of the middle way of Buddhism, where you're able to walk the path of seeing the negatives in life and the positives in life and kind of lying somewhere peacefully in between, understanding where both sides come from. And then from there you can choose, which side you walk on. And so Elrond, standing back where he is in his position, and looking at the way things turned out in the past, he can then make his decisions to actually be a force for good and to help the fight against Sauron. So it's interesting that Tolkien created a character like Elrond, because he is an example, I think, of someone who really does live his entire life as through the Eightfold Path. And all of the elves do, but Elrond has most of the words, and you can see more of an example with him, as well as Galadriel. Okay, the next one is the Right Mindfulness. So I said this. Mindfulness is a way of reflecting on your inner thoughts and of the present situation in front of you before you act. Mindfulness is being aware of all of the possible probabilities and the solutions that lie around you. So with the elves, when you think about the elves, mindfulness is something that comes to mind. You can imagine Elrond quietly contemplating things and walking along the bridge of Rivendell. You can imagine Arwen contemplating and being mindful in the moment before she decides to stay on Middle Earth with Aragorn for only one lifetime or sail to the Undying Lands. You can see this mindfulness in all of the elven characters as well, of course, with Gandalf. But I particularly saw an actual action of mindfulness here. So Golin the dwarf. "Ah, alas," cried Golin, "when will the day come of our revenge? But still there are the three. What of the 3 rings of the elves? Very mighty rings, it is said. Do not the elf lords keep them? Yet they too were made by the Dark Lord long ago. Are they idle? I see elf lords here. Will they not say?" The elves returned no answer. "Did you not hear me, Golin?" said Elrond. "The 3 were not made by Sauron, nor did he ever touch them. But of them it is not permitted to speak, so much only in this hour of doubt I may now say, they are not idle. But they were not made as weapons of war or conquest. That is not their power. Those who made them did not desire strength or domination or hoarded wealth, but understanding, making, and healing to preserve all things unstained. These things the elves of Middle-earth have been in some great measure gained, though with sorrow, but all that has been wrought by those who wield the 3 will turn to their undoing, and their minds and hearts will become revealed to Sauron if he regains the 1. It would be better if the 3 had never been. That is his purpose." So you can see that Golin symbolizes this impatience that the dwarves had. So he's like, what? We have these rings. Will you not use them? They're powerful. And you could see that the elves did not even answer because they wanted that moment to stay and sit. And you can see that mindfulness within the elf lords that were sitting around the Council of Elrond. And then Elrond finally speaks and says, did you not hear me when I spoke about this? Like, this is not what the elven rings were made for. They were made to actually be healing to Middle Earth. They were not for power or conquest. So they cannot be used in that kind of way. So let's move on to the next. The right effort. So the right effort is seen, I think, most visibly as far as action goes within Legolas, because he is the one that is the most tireless of the fellowship, and he put in the effort just as much as the other characters, of course, but there's a type of effort that he puts in that is above and beyond, because he doesn't have to be there. You know, he could sail to the west and he could forget Middle Earth forever, and he can just let the humans and the hobbits and the dwarves just figure it out. But Legolas came with. And so he puts forth his effort in a way that he didn't need to, but he goes above and beyond. And the right effort that Buddha always spoke about is when someone makes it a point to make the right efforts for the good of the whole, to always think about others before the self. And so that is the right effort, making a point to always do your best you can to help others and for the group and the collective. So Legolas is definitely an example of this. Here is an example. Legolas watched them for a while with a smile on his lips, and then he turned to the others. The strongest must seek a way, say you, but I say, let a plowman plow, but choose an otter for swimming, and for running light over grass and leaf, or over snow, an elf. With that he sprang forth nimbly, and then Frodo noticed, as if for the first time, though he had long known it, that the elf had no boots, but wore only light shoes, as he always did, and his feet made little imprint in the snow. Farewell, he said to Gandalf, I go to find the sun. And then swift as a runner over firm sand he shot away, and quickly overtaking the toiling men, with a wave of his hand he passed them, and sped into the distance, and vanished round the rocky turn. There are so many examples of Legolas going above and beyond and helping the group. Like I said, he didn't have to be there, but he joined the fellowship in order to help. So that is definitely the right effort. We see this in a lot of the elven characters, of course, but I wanted to show you that physical evidence where Tolkien described him as a character that did go above and beyond. And it's interesting because when you go back a little bit, where you see that Legolas watched this group, they were toiling heavily in the places of the snow that was breast high. And Boromir seemed to be swimming or burrowing with his great arms rather than walking. And then Legolas was watching them for a while with a smile on his lips. And he said, well, I have this ability. I have this ability to be, quick as lightning and light over earth and snow. So he uses it. And that's always putting forth your effort. Being able to recognize your gifts and your abilities, and to put forth the effort into the world to help others in a way that you can. Not being lazy, not being full of sloth, but actually putting forth the effort to do what you can in order to help. And I think that that is a good example of it, but of course there are so many examples of the elves giving their effort when they could have just left Middle Earth and just kind of left the humans to fight it off themselves with the dwarves and with the hobbits. And here is another one. Right concentration. So the right concentration is described as the ability to once again be mindful, to concentrate and focus on the thoughts that are most important. to not be tempted or swayed to think about things that are just not that important and are not going to help you in some kind of way. Reach some type of inner awareness. And this is a place where I saw that there was a bit of concentration. Like I said, I have to go through and find examples, but I can find examples probably all over the book, but this is one here. So this is in the chapter of the Mirror of Galadriel when they get to Lothlorien. When all the guests were seated before his chair, the Lord looked at them again. And this is Lord Celeborn, so the Elf Lord. Here there are 8, he said. 9 were set out. So said the messages, but maybe there has been some change of counsel that we have not heard. Elrond is far away, and darkness gathers between us, and all this year the shadows have grown longer. Nay, there was no change of counsel, said the Lady Galadriel, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear and musical, but deeper than woman's wont. Gandalf the Grey set out with the company, but he did not pass the borders of this land. Now tell us where he is, for I much desired to speak with him again, but I cannot see him from afar, unless he comes within the fences of Lothlorien. A grey mist is about him, and the ways of his feet and of his mind are hidden from me. I think that this is a good example of concentration because elves have that ability to telepathically understand others. And we are starting to learn that humans have this ability too when they practice meditation and mindful practices, and they increase this ability to concentrate and to focus their thoughts on others and to really read each other. There becomes a telepathic connection. And so this is an example of telepathy to me, or at least deep concentration. You can see that Galadriel did not even speak when the party came. So she was concentrating. She was thinking deeply, looking at the fellowship around her and analyzing. It was like she was processing deeply about what was going on, what was the inner workings that other people were not speaking about. So that to me is an example of concentration. Sometimes we go through life and we're not in a state of concentration, and that's when we leap before we think and we act before we reflect, and we make a lot of mistakes. So Buddha was trying to teach that when we can get into the discipline of being in a state of deep concentration and making sure that we concentrate before we act and do the things that we do, a lot of times we can bypass the path of suffering and pain that we cause ourselves because we only reflect further. And inside of us is the truth that we already know. So when you get deeper into it, then you understand what you're really supposed to do. And concentrating deeper, you do reach a connection to others. And that is really what it's all about, is connecting to others and realizing what they need and what need, kind of anticipating the needs of the collective or the needs of the group. And Galadriel shows that there, that she's quiet, she's thinking, she's deeply concentrating, and she's almost trying to reach her thoughts out to Gandalf. But she can't, because of course he has fallen into the shadow, and he's in that phase of transformation from Gandalf the Grey to the White. So he's not part of the physical realm as of right now. And that's what she is not able to go past that barrier and reach her thoughts to. At least not in that moment. Okay, the next one is the right livelihood and the way of life. So the Buddha described that the right livelihood is being able to live a life that you're proud of. Having a job or a career or a way to make money or a way to do things in your life daily that you're proud of. So he said that you should stay away from, gambling and being thieves, making money in a way that is corrupted, where you have to take from others, where you have to harm or hurt others in order to make money. The blood money idea of, gaining money from other people's harm or their own suffering. I mean, this is something that the Buddha really tried to teach about, is that people who do that are not going to find that true enlightenment, that true happiness and bliss by following that path. Because when you make it your effort to have a job that is not really aligned to the truth of your soul, the untarnished, untainted, pure part of your being that is in everybody, then you're not going to be in touch with it daily, because you're going to be making these decisions that are going to get you further and further away from that feeling of purity. So the elves didn't really have much of a livelihood, or it wasn't expressed as having jobs, but I did find an example of Galadriel setting out to make it part of her life, her livelihood, to do something for the greater good. So here it is. It was who first summoned the White Council, and if my designs had not gone amiss, it would have been governed by Gandalf the Grey, and then mishap things would have gone otherwise. But even now there is hope left. I will not give you counsel, saying to do this or do that, for not in doing or contriving, nor in choosing between this course and another, can I avail, but only in knowing what was, and is, and in part also what shall be. But this I will say to you, your quest stands upon the edge of a knife. Stray but a little, and it will fail, to the ruin of all, yet hope remains while all the company is true. So while Galadriel didn't get paid for it, it was part of her livelihood to set up the council, to be a council on Middle Earth. This is part of her profession. Even though she doesn't get paid for it, it's what she does with her time. And so when you have the right livelihood, those who choose a job to be a doctor, a nurse, a firefighter, a healer, a teacher, these are types of jobs that do service and help others. And in turn, it does give you a sense of satisfaction when you help your fellow beings. So she created the White Council in order to help her fellow beings on Middle Earth, and to be a place where people could come together, all the wise can come together and talk and meet and discuss the topics of Middle Earth, and to protect Middle Earth from the rise of the Dark Army once again. So that's an example of, I think, positive or right livelihood, when you put your efforts to have a life that is for the good of others. Okay, the next one is the right speech. So the Buddha said that the right speech is not about being right or wrong, because a person who speaks and expresses their opinions are not always right. There's lots of different ways of seeing truth, and everybody has their own unique perceptions. But the right speech is always undoubtable to be one that does not harm others, does not slander others, does not seek to cause chaos and disharmony in the world. So when we are rightful of our speech, we are kind with our words. We are making sure that we say the right things. And sometimes this is probably the hardest at times, because our expressive side is also connected to our emotions. So when you are in control of your emotions, you also can control the way that you express yourself. And so here is an example of right speech that I found. Do you wish to look, Frodo? Said the Lady Galadriel. You did not wish to see elf magic, and were content. Do you advise me to look? Asked Frodo. No, she said. I do not counsel you one way or the other. I am not a counselor. You may learn something, and whether what you see be fair or evil, that may be profitable, and yet it may not. Seeing is both good and perilous. Yet I think, Frodo, that you have courage and wisdom enough for the venture, or I would not have brought you here. Do as you will. So you can see that Galadriel is speaking kindly. There's a lot of examples of that the elves were wise and they had a lot of wisdom and they knew a lot, but they also were not holding back from letting others know that they were wise too. She shares that gift to Frodo, that I see wisdom in you. And that probably meant the world to this little hobbit who could look up to Galadriel as a wise being, and then she gives him this gift and says, you are wise and you have courage. I mean, that is right speech. That's someone who is putting forth the effort to make others feel good by using the right type of words. Okay, the next is right thought. So, of course, we see this a lot in the elves. They were very thinking type beings. And so we find this in this area here where the Mirror of Galadriel we're still at. I found that this was one of the best examples because it's all about temptation into going with her ego and, going with that darker side of herself. Although she didn't have much of a dark side, it was a part of her that could manipulate others, could take advantage of others on Middle Earth. And so she had the right thought to come back. So here it is. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. And then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again. And lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I passed the test, she said. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. They stood for a long while in silence, and at length the lady spoke again. Let us return, she said. In the morning you must depart. For now we have chosen, and the tides of fate are flowing. So I picked this as the right thought because before that, I did not read it, but that's the part where she says, oh, you're going to give me the ring freely, and in place of a dark lord, you're going to have a beautiful queen, and I shall rule, and people shall fall and lament over me. And then she has this second thought, and she lets her hand fall away from the ring. And so that is the right thought. The Buddha talked about how the right thought is when you focus on the right things and you make the right choices. You use logic and your wisdom of experience to make the right choices. And in that moment, I think that Galadriel did the right thinking. She also made the right action because she pulled her hand away, but I have another example of action here with Celeborn. So this is the right action. All shall be prepared for you and await you at the haven before noon tomorrow, said Celeborn. I will send you my people to you in the morning to help and make ready for the journey. Now we will wish you all a fair night and untroubled sleep. Good night, my friends, said Galadriel. Sleep in peace. Do not trouble your hearts overmuch with thought of the road tonight. Maybe the paths that you each shall tread are already laid before your feet, though you do not see them. Good night. So I picked this as the right action because there you see that the elves are getting ready to prepare to help the fellowship prepare. So you have then the group of Lothlorien elves come to them in the morning and they give them beautiful cloaks and food for their journey. So you see the right action being taken place where the elves could be wise and arrogant beings that don't help, but instead they decided to put the right action forward and to help the fellowship in the way that they best could by providing what the fellowship needed, both in wisdom and some material things that can help them along the way. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I highly recommend learning a little bit about the Eightfold Path, contemplating it and reflecting on it yourself daily. What are the ways that you can attribute the Eightfold Path to your daily life? What are the 8 ways of being that you can bring more into your life to make sure that you're always on the right path. People say that there's no right and there's no wrong in the world, but there's very much a right path. And the right path is the one that's less pain, less suffering for you, and more joy and more bliss that you experience. So, Hananle for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.